Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight's guest is the council member from the 11th City Council District that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Bedford Park, Norwood, Kingsbridge, Cortlandt Village, Riverdale, and Wakefield and Woodlawn. He's one of 20 council members who voted against the mayor's City of Yes plan. We'll talk with him about that tonight. We'll also talk about congestion pricing, controversial development plans for Sedgwick Avenue, his role as chair of the Higher Education Committee, school leadership, the 2025 election. It'll be a 4-hour show and more. Anyway, please join me in welcoming the affable council member from the 11th District, Eric Dinowitz. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Gary.
Let's really just start with City of Yes. The vote was 31-20. You were one of the 20 who voted against what the mayor boasted as the most ambitious update to New York City's zoning code since 1961. You said, it was in the Riverdale press this week, that it was because of your constituents. What were your constituents concerned about, and what made you say, I agree, and you click no on the ballot?
Yeah, this was, I guess, an ambitious plan. It was a plan to essentially upzone the entire city. Where the mayor would say a little more housing in every neighborhood, but what it really would do, it would, for the most part, allow developers to have more say in the future of our community. From the beginning, I certainly tried to keep an open mind. We had community forums, we had Bronx-wide ones, district-wide ones, and even days before the vote, the land use team at the City Council, who was incredible during this process, by the way, keeping us informed, keeping communities informed, listening to the needs of council members, held a Zoom with them. We had 150 people from District 11 alone registered for that Zoom. They presented what the modifications were to the plan. I think it's important to note that the land use team at the City Council and the Speaker really did hear about a lot of the concerns that a significant number of the members had. It was a relatively close vote. But throughout the process, I went to community meetings, hosted those community meetings.
I'm still waiting for the conclusion. I think we'll all agree that you did your homework.
Well, but that's important, because that's a critical part of my job, is representing the community, making sure I've done everything I could to hear from them,
right.
Whether it's surveys, community meetings, my meetings. All told, that the constituents said, we have a lot of development happening here. And I heard that.
Here in individual neighborhoods.
In the Northwest Bronx.
Right.
And even the night before the vote, I was at a community meeting, and they were just questioning, why do we need to have more development? They're already tearing down the single-family homes to build 4, 6, 8-story apartment buildings. And they're already taking away so much parking. And we have such disinvestment in our infrastructure. That plus what I've seen in our community, and when we've seen developers have the opportunity to do what they want to do, they typically don't do what's in the best interest of the community.
So let's just talk about some of the modifications that took place. So there were incentives to add 20% of the units to be affordable for projects that are at least 10,000 square feet. Not good enough? Not enough affordable housing?
Well, the City Council added some affordability in a few ways.
Right.
One of the ways was saying, if you're going to build more in the transit-oriented development around certain types of transit, now as
subway stations, bus stations,
not but just the subway stations. In my district,
Metro North, I assume.
Metro North, they originally wanted to do it within a half mile of Metro North. The council, we reduced that to a quarter mile. But what they're going to be able to do now is build taller and denser around the transit-oriented development.
And those should be affordable.
Well, a certain percentage of them are going to have affordability. The City Council, also the Speaker, did, I think, an incredible job negotiating $5 billion of commitments in capital and expense, part of which goes to a more affordability for some of our housing, including investments in Mitchell-Lama. We've seen our Mitchell-Lama units really skyrocket in rent and maintenance fees, partially because the city has disinvested from them. Over the years, they have refused to invest the capital needs.
Is this part of City for All, or this was really just another side, funding to fix some problems that already exist?
The City for All was the companion piece, the commitments about the funding, the working groups. The City for Yes was the zoning, so that's where it said if you're going to do the 20% additional, they have to be affordable. We said it has to be more affordable than what they originally proposed around transit. The transit-oriented development has to have some affordability there in some of those units. So that was part of the zoning. Yeah.
And then the other, or another thing I'm assuming is of concern to you is the notion of building apartments on top of commercial districts, so that if you have a district, and there are a number of them, of course, in your district, if you have an avenue that has commercial stores, let's say, they can now build apartments above that.
Yeah, I think
is that a concern?
The question
is
for
that
me
okay?
is more. The real answer is it depends, and that's sort of the crux of this, right? Which is it depends on the community. There were limitations that the council that we put in, saying if it's 1 block long, if they're single-family homes, if less than half the block's commercial, you can't just start building like that.
Right.
But the answer is it depends. And we've seen time and again when we do ULURPs, when we say come to the community, we will vote to upzone it. We'll let you build more housing. It has to be done with the community.
So that's, and I recall, because I've been sitting in this seat a long time, when they did the Drome Avenue rezoning, and the current borough president was a council member, Vanessa Gibson. She and, at that time, council member Fernando Cabrera really worked to customize the additional housing and the additional infrastructure, including I think they got a school out of it and some other things, to fit the community. So what you're saying is, if you do one size fits all, maybe some areas where there is a commercial strip, you don't want to put housing. It's not appropriate for any number of reasons. On the other hand, we need housing. Maybe there are some places it can be done, but this doesn't allow for that distinction.
Yeah, and that was, again, one of the underlying problems I had was that it was taking power out of the community. With all the great changes that we did make with the city council, ultimately, it takes powers out of the hand of the community. And we see on 231st and Broadway, where we're doing a ULURP, and we're able to say, you know what, the community, even though it's near a train, we want parking. And, as a community, we want more family-sized units.
There used to be a parking lot there, and I don't know if you're old enough to recall. I certainly do recall. But there used to be a parking lot behind where the hardware store was and all those kinds of things. But now, of course, there's not.
There's not. It's where the rental car place is.
I want to ask you about it. Well, no, first of all, let's just review. So the City for All got $68 million for home ownership opportunities, $365 million for tenant protection programs, $2 billion for infrastructure, increasing funding and support to strengthen community land trusts, which we've covered on this show, and other items. So that was kind of the give back, or the way that people like you and others in the city council said, we want to have something out of this process.
Yeah, and I think those commitments are great. I think the speaker did a fabulous job negotiating them. I'm a little concerned about whether the commitments are real, because we've seen
the commitments from
the mayor.
From the mayor.
Because
and that is not the commitment.
No. So for example,
Go
we've
ahead.
seen in budget cycles before where we've, as a city council, voted on a budget to allocate funding to certain agencies, and OMB hasn't filled those positions or hasn't hired for those positions.
I see.
So I'm a little less
Skeptical.
I'm a little more skeptical that the administration would do the work or approve filling those positions that we need.
I got to ask you something else that I read about, and I was trying to fully understand it. And we've been through it in the Bronx, in the Northwest Bronx. Your father had been through it with the filtration plant. The environmental impact statement said that there would be no impact to climate change, to water availability, and infrastructure. It starts to make me think these environmental impact statements are not worth the paper they're printed on, because how could a zoning change of this magnitude not affect the amount of cement that's around, which immediately affects the heat? I mean, it struck me, I was like, well, then let's do something with the environmental impact statement because it's not happening.
I think a lot of people agree with you.
Well, you must have voted no.
Well, in their testimony, they said, well, it's only a little extra housing everywhere, so it won't really impact the environment. A lot of people don't believe that, and there are people who say they didn't even follow the law, that it's not a text amendment, it's a map amendment. So there are lawsuits that are happening. But even in our district alone, we have the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook, which is one of the biggest green infrastructure projects I think ever we've had in this district. And they took money out of it.
New York, yeah.
They took money out of it.
Did they? Oh,
in the previous budget.
Wow.
And that's an area where we get complaints about flooding coming up from the basement.
You know, I was going to put it at the end of the program, but it's relevant here. Are you concerned that with the Trump administration, because some of that was federal money originally to purchase the land from the railroad, are you concerned that some of that stuff will dry up? And then, of course, we have to talk about congestion pricing.
I have a lot of concerns.
Oh, okay.
About the Trump administration.
So that'll be another show. I want to just continue on this. The other item which I left out of the City of you all was to strengthen support for community and faith-based organizations to do affordable housing development. As you well know, and it is in my neighborhood, the Van Cortlandt Jewish Center is, there's a whole area there where there were private houses and trees, and those have all been sold to a developer. But the VCJC has said they believe in market rate housing for that area. In Van Cortlandt Village and Kingsbridge, that would stick out like a sore thumb. I don't know who would take those apartments. Is there money, is there support for them to build affordable housing so that they can get a good deal for them as well as not hurt the community with something it doesn't need?
Yeah, so that, in any development, there has to be a developer, right? So there has to be a developer to come forward and say, we want to build affordable housing. And I know in that area, there is a developer willing to come and do affordable housing for the Van Cortlandt Jewish Center.
But that's not who they're working with.
That's not who they're working with.
I see. So you know of a developer who would like to do that. I mean, that's part of the issue that's been documented is that they have reached out or they have not reached out to some of those organizations.
Yeah, and certainly when it comes to the AG's office, the Attorney General's office is supposed to review, in the state, is supposed to review all these transactions when it comes to faith-based organizations and developers, and they are supposed to report what offers they were given.
And so we'll see. Do you have another thing you want to say about that development, or we can move on to something?
I think just as it relates to City of Yes, I think very obviously the City of Yes is going to impact or could impact that development. And one of the big ones was that 20% affordability bonus. And so if in an R6A, which that area is, they could build like 6 to 8 stories. They could build another story or two on top of that, as long as that's affordable for the
they make
AMI.
that affordable. So that's really a give back because you're going to get a much larger structure from what's there, but at least it'll be affordable. I don't know about that. Yeah. I'm working on it. All right, let's just talk about congestion pricing. Are you happy that the governor said, well, we really need to do this, we need the money for MTA, or are you just saying, look, people shouldn't have to pay $9 when they get into Manhattan?
Who the heck wants to pay $9 to drive within their own city for something that's really going to benefit Lower Manhattan? And we've seen this time and again.
Wait, you're saying it will benefit Lower Manhattan?
Well, yeah.
In terms of the traffic? Or in
terms of the traffic. But we've also seen in New York State, New York City, a lot of the investment goes to Manhattan. Well, they could spend $4 billion on a couple of train stations for the 2nd Avenue subway. That's great. But they can't afford a few million to make Bronx stations accessible for people with disabilities, older adults. And
do you think, this is all speculative now, had we done it at $15 a trip and there would be kind of quote unquote guaranteed more funding for the MTA, you could get that money, or you feel like that money is still going to be earmarked for non-Bronx things, for want of a better term?
I think we've seen time and again the Bronx not getting the investment that it deserves. We've seen that for years and years now.
So an alternative to congestion pricing, or just no? I mean, I realize it's too late, and of course, then the federal government might weigh in on that.
I have a feeling the federal government's going to weigh in. But something that I think we don't do enough of when we talk about our budgets, our city budgets, I'll give 2 examples of this, is we don't always look at the fiscal implications and where else we can get money from. So, for example, we invest in an organization called West Bronx Housing. You may have heard of them. They help keep people in their homes. They help people sign up for benefits. We give them, we allocate.
You say we, meaning the council?
The city council,
I see.
my office. They get, I think, over $100,000. They're in our office helping to keep people in their homes. But one of the things they do is they bring in over $1 million of federal funding through SNAP, things like SNAP benefits and other federal programs.
Because of the work that they do.
Because of the work that they do. And there are programs like that all over the place that are, it's right morally to keep people in their homes, and it's smart fiscally to leverage programs like that to bring in more federal dollars.
Again, that brings up the question of, would you be concerned that some of those federal dollars might not be coming once we get past
certainly.
Once we get past January 20th?
I'm 100% concerned. There are a lot of things I'm concerned about, but obviously funding to New York City, former President Trump, when he was president, already hurt New Yorkers by eliminating the SALT deduction. So he essentially increased our taxes. And I know he goes around saying he's reducing taxes. He essentially increased our taxes because we can now no longer deduct our state and local income taxes from our federal income taxes.
Let's switch gears, because this obviously could take a whole show to really go through every inch of it. You're the chair of the Higher Education Committee, which specifically for the City Council means our public colleges, which is CUNY. We have 3 of them in the Bronx. There's Bronx Community College, Hostos, and of course Lehman College, where our BronxNet studios are. How's CUNY doing? I mean, are we happy? Or what's coming out of the committee that we need to know about? Or are things status quo? I mean, Lehman certainly seems to be busy and doing well. I mean,
I would say very mixed. We in the City Council are fighting hard to make sure CUNY has the resources it needs to succeed. Lehman College got, I think, $2 million from the City Council for their new nursing school. Bronx Community got investment for a new sports facility. We're making the investments we need to make. And we know that CUNY is the greatest engine of economic and social mobility in New York City.
I am a graduate.
I got my master's degree from CUNY Hunter.
Oh, there you go. I got my degree from here, Lehman College.
My dad got his degree from Lehman. My wife got her degree from CUNY. My sister so we're a CUNY family. But one of the big issues that's come up in CUNY and colleges across the country, we've seen it on everywhere from Bronx 12 to CNN, is anti-Semitism increasing in just being really out there, really overt
really
anti-Semitism.
Specifically in CUNY, listen, I understand bigger universities have their issues, but that's in CUNY and urban colleges.
CUNY at some of the campuses, not all of the campuses.
Right.
And Governor Hochul last year commissioned Jonathan Littman to create a report on anti-Semitism at CUNY, and we last month had a hearing on that report where he made 13 recommendations. And some of them echoed things we've been calling for a long time. But the situation there is really, really deeply concerning. Because when a kid's applying to college...
Well, let's just talk about
Sure.
correcting that behavior, so to speak. Do we need greater intensity in the curriculums and in the, teaching sociology and teaching history and teaching politics and ethics in those areas, so that when students leave class, their first thing on their mind is, at least being fair-minded?
Well, yeah, all of those things. Colleges should be a
you're
place...
You're a former educator, so,
Yeah.
I think you would understand that.
I think everyone should understand that schools should be a place where students are taught to have difficult conversations and to be a little uncomfortable with certain issues, but come away being able to talk face-to-face about differences. That's not what's happening at CUNY.
I want to ask you this, because this is one of the high-profile things that happen. So somebody will come in who is a speaker who may have represented an anti-Semitic organization, and then there are people who say, well, he has the right to, he or she, of course, has the right to speak, but then there are others who say we don't want that kind of dialogue on our campus. That's a very heavy educational, ethical question.
It is, and certainly we discussed this at the hearing. The report addresses it. First of all, CUNY themselves are not prohibited from their own free speech, from speaking out against the speakers who come in. Right. Secondly, some of those speakers, you mentioned sociology and civics, some of those speakers are coming to math classes in violation of their own syllabus.
I see.
So CUNY was unable to tell us how often that happens and how often professors have been disciplined for that conduct, which violates their conduct, their code of conduct. As it relates to certain speakers, I find it the height of hypocrisy personally, where the same people who say free speech, free speech, free speech want to cancel anyone who's a Zionist.
Listen, from the media point of view, and obviously I deal with all the sides of politics, we make sure that if we have somebody from, one side, we bring in somebody from the other side as often as we can. I just want to move to something else because of my own family's history and education. And you would know this like you know your own name. If a school changes principal often, so they change principal, often that school becomes one where there's either an enrollment problem, a security problem, or other problems that are non-productive. We have had Dr. Misha Ross Porter in 2021 as a chancellor, David Banks from 2022 to 2024 when Mayor Adams became the mayor, and now within 3 years, our third chancellor in Melissa Aviles Ramos. Do you think that there is some insecurity, instability in the school system right now? And I know you're on the committee for education as well.
Yeah, I think it's very objective to say there's a lot of instability, not just to do with the change of the guard, but out of COVID, the contracts with the nursery schools, changing of curriculum, changing of state standards and state tests. All of these changes make things very unstable for teachers and for students and for principals. But as it relates to Melissa Ramos, she can't control what her predecessor did or what her predecessor's predecessor did.
Well, this is the problem with school leadership when they change principals.
It sure is, but I can say I have the utmost faith in her, and she's very familiar with this district. Not only is she from the Bronx.
Oh, with District 11. Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, with Council District 11, when we had an issue at the Garden at Clinton, the school was going to shut down the Garden, mow it down,
I remember that.
prevent the farmers market from meeting on the weekends. She was the one who was on the ground and visited the site with me before we got to fix the problem. She was there. She understands it. We had a new family migrant shelter open in Wakefield, and the kids were coming in, and the shelter was totally unprepared. They were using the school to print immigration documents. I brought together the elected leaders and city agencies. It was Melissa Ramos from the DOE who really took the bull by the horns and made sure the school and the kids got everything they needed, from more resources in the school to getting the food they needed, to a new bus stop outside the shelter.
One last education question, and then we'll just wrap it up. Did you think David Banks' literacy adjustments were effective, or is it too soon because he's gone and now we have a new chancellor?
I saw Mayor de Blasio 2 nights ago, and I said to him, the one regret I have about leaving teaching was I'll never get to see those kids who got UPK grow up to be my high school students. I think it's really tough to say what the impact is at this point, but I do agree that there needs to be a phonics-based literacy in our schools. You need to work with school communities to make sure that happens, but phonics-based literacy, I believe, from having taught it to high schoolers who didn't know how to read coming into my classroom, we did phonics-based literacy, and they learned to read.
Well, maybe they'll come knocking at your door and saying that everything's worked out. Okay.
I hope so.
Let's just talk about, we mentioned the new president, Donald Trump. Want to list a concern or a couple of concerns? Are there migrant issues in your community that you're concerned about, or other issues? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, so as it relates to Donald Trump, I'm certainly concerned about people who come to the country seeking a better life for themselves, for their families, working hard, getting their kids in school, and being treated like criminals and potentially deported, and destabilizing families
And neighborhoods.
and neighborhoods, creating another generation of kids without parents. It happened to my students. I remember when Donald Trump was first elected, and my students were scared, and some of their parents did end up going through deportation proceedings. But we need to make sure we're taking care of our kids. I'm concerned about federal funding for things like housing, as we discussed, for infrastructure, for all the things we need to do to make our city affordable and safe.
Well, I guess it's a wait and see thing. Of course, it's an election year. It's too early to ask you who you're supporting for mayor. Do you have thoughts about the upcoming mayoral election or any of the other?
Tons.
Well, please share. We got a minute
Well,
left.
I think there are a few important things. Maybe some lessons learned from the previous election, but I think one of the things we as Democrats have to do is better articulate how hard we are working for working families and working people. I think there's a lot we're doing in the city for that, and I think we have to do a better job listening to everyday New Yorkers, hearing their needs, and I also think there's been a lot of reliance on identity politics, to in a way that's sort of harmful and sort of dumbs down our electoral system. We need to talk to people as people, because that's what I believe voters really want. They want someone who's going to go to City Hall, the State House, and fight for them.
Last question, legislation in your mind. When I get back to the city council, we start the new session on,
I have a few bills.
name one or two.
I'll name two. One's to improve 311. You do it all the time. You put on the app, I have a complaint, 311, it's closed. You look outside, it's not closed. Pothole, tree stump, not closed. My bill would allow for a feedback mechanism and an agency report card.
Right.
And the
then
second one
is
print accessibility. We have all sorts of documents printed by New York City that is not visually accessible to people with visual impairments. That includes a lot of older adults.
Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, thank you so much. We
Thanks for
appreciate
having
your
me.
time. We appreciate your service, and I'm sure we'll see you around town and even here on Bronx Talk. We're thanking everybody. Our producer is Rebecca Hemick. Our director is Will Guzman. Urelis Encarnacion is on graphics. Kia Willard is on audio. The editor is Yessi Diaz. We have a cast of thousands working with us here in the studio. And you too, the most important of the people of the Bronx. So if the curtain don't fall, the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. Good night. Roll the credits.